good afternoon, or good evening, whatever you like. It's good news. It's raining! Yay! We've been waiting for it for ages. You're very welcome back. We're going to carry on with Prince Caspian today. We didn't do a story yesterday. That's because yesterday was Blackout Tuesday. And I shut myself up. I did research. I looked at the struggles going on in the world. And I stand in solidarity with all black people, with all my friends and everybody else, and say that what is going on in the world, the racism and all that stuff, is terrible. And I believe in Jesus. And he said, love your neighbor. If we all did that, man, the world would be a good place. But I'm not going to be silent about this. It's everybody's job around the world to stand up and speak out for truth, righteousness, and justice. That's my little piece on it. I didn't want to say nothing, but I need to do a little bit more research into the whole, into all the situation before I just go shouting my tongue off. So yeah, it's good to think before we say things. Definitely. That's from the Bible as well. Anyway, let's go back into the story. Let's have a little bit of fun. I'm certainly enjoying reading this one. There's a lot of walking around in this one, actually. I didn't realise that. But hopefully there'll be some battles towards the end. Right, so, Prince Caspian. We're on chapter 10, where obviously nobody knew. Oh. Well, I wasn't prepared for Blackout Tuesday, so the whole... my schedule of getting this story finished by the end of the week is slightly messed up. But that doesn't matter at all. I'll just carry on and keep going, even into the weekend, if I have to. So there. Cool. Right. Prince Caspian, chapter 10, The Return of the Lion. Now, I'll just remind you what's been going on. They've just, all five of them, been discussing which way to go. To go up the gorge or down the gorge. And Lucy wants to go up, I think, because she saw Aslan. But everyone else did not see Aslan, so they're like, we're going down. So it's everyone against Lucy. Let's dive straight back in. To keep along the edge of the gorge was not so easy as it had looked. Before they'd gone many yards, they were confronted with young fir woods growing on the very edge. And after they tried to go through those, stooping and pushing for about 10 minutes, they realised that, in there, it would take them about an hour to do half a mile. So they came back out again and decided to go around the fir wood. This took them much further to their right than they wanted to go, far out of sight of the cliffs and out of the sound of the river, so they began to be afraid that they lost it altogether. Nobody knew the time, but it was getting to the hottest part of the day. When they were able to at last go back to the edge of the gorge, nearly a mile below the point from which they'd started, they found the cliffs on their side of it a good deal lower and more broken. Soon they found a way down into the gorge and continued the journey at the river's edge. But first they had a rest and a long drink. No one was talking any more about breakfast or even dinner with Caspian. They may have been wise to stick to the rush instead of going along the top. It kept them sure of their direction, and ever since the fir wood they'd all been afraid of being forced too far out of their course and losing themselves in the wood. It was an old and pathless forest, and you could not keep anything like a straight course in it. Patches of hopeless brambles, fallen trees, boggy patches, and dense undergrowth would be always getting in your way. For the gorge of the rush was not at all a nice place for travelling either. I mean, it wasn't a nice place for people in a hurry. For an afternoon's ramble, ending in a picnic tea, it would have been delightful. It had everything you could want on an occasion of that sort. Rumbling waterfalls, silver cascades, deep amber-coloured pools, mossy rocks, and deep moss on the banks, in which you could sink over your ankles. Every kind of fern, jewel-like dragonflies, sometimes a hawk overhead, and once, Peter and Trumpkin both thought, an eagle. But of course, what the children and the dwarf wanted to see as soon as possible was the great river below them, and Baruna, and the way to Aslan's How. I kind of want to see that and all. Here you go, like picture time. Look, there's a little dragonfly. And is that an eagle? Is that an eagle? I think so, because of the beak. As they went on, the rush began to fall more and more steeply. Their journey became more and more of a climb and less of a walk. In places even as even a dangerous climb over slippery rock with a nasty drop into dark chasms, and the river roaring angrily at the bottom. You may be sure that they watched the cliffs on their left eagerly for any sign of a break or any place where they could climb them. But those cliffs remained cruel. It was maddening, because everyone knew that once they were out of the gorge on that side, they would have only a smooth slope and a fairly short walk to Caspian's headquarters. The boys and the dwarf were now in favour of lighting a fire and cooking their bear meat. Susan didn't want this. She only wanted, as she said, to get on and finish it and get out of these beastly woods. Lucy was far too tired and miserable to have any opinion about anything. Well, naturally, if you remember a few days ago, Lucy was crying because everyone was like, we're going this way, but she wanted to go that way. But as there was no dry wood to be had, it mattered very little what anyone thought. The boys began to wonder if raw meat was really as nasty as they'd always been told. Trumpkin assured them it was. Of course, if the children had attempted a journey like this a few days ago in England, they would have been knocked up. That's old speak for exhausted. I think I've explained before now how Narnia was altering them. Even Lucy was by now, so to speak, only 1/3 of a little girl going to boarding school for the first time, and 2/3 a queen of Narnia. At last, said Susan. Oh, hooray, said Peter. The river gorge had just made a bend, and the whole view spread out beneath them. They could see the open country stretching before them to the horizon, and between it and them, the broad silver ribbon of the great river. They could see the specially broad and shallow place which had once been the fords of Beruna, but was now spanned by a long, many-arched bridge. There was a little town at the far end of it. By Jove, said Edmund, we fought the Battle of Beruna just where that town is. This cheered the boys up more than anything. You can't help feeling stronger when you look at a place where you won a glorious victory, not to mention a kingdom, hundreds of years ago. Peter and Edmund were soon so busy talking about the battle that they forgot about their sore feet and the heavy drag of their mail shirts on their shoulders. The dwarf was interested too. Oh, go on. They were all getting on at a quicker pace now. The going became easier. Though there were still sheer cliffs on their left, the ground was becoming lower on their right. Soon it was no longer a gorge at all, only a valley. There were no more waterfalls, and presently they were in fairly thick woods again. Then, all at once, whoosh, and a sound rather like the stroke of a woodpecker. The children were still wondering where, ages ago, they'd heard a sound just like that, and why they disliked it so, when Trumpkin shouted, "Down!" at the same moment forcing Lucy, who happened to be next to him, flat down onto the bracken. Peter, who had been looking up to see if he could spot a squirrel, had seen what it was. A long, cruel arrow had sunk into a tree trunk just above his head. As he pulled Susan down and dropped himself, another came rasping over his shoulder and struck the ground at his side. Shoo-doo! Quick! Quick! Get back! Crawl! Panted Trumpkin. They turned and wriggled along uphill, under the bracken, amid clouds of horrible, buzzing flies. Arrows whizzed round them. One struck Susan's helmet with a sharp ping and glanced off. Whoa! They crawled quicker. Sweat poured off them. Then they ran, stooping nearly double. The boys held their swords in their hand for fear they would trip them up. There's a picture, actually, of them crawling. Quick! Take cover, lads! Yeah. It was heartbreaking work. All uphill again, back over the ground they'd already travelled. When they felt they really couldn't run any more, even to save their lives, they all dropped down in the damp moss beside a waterfall and behind a big boulder, panting. They were surprised just to see how high they had already got. They listened intently and heard no sound of pursuit. So, that's all right, said Trumpkin, drawing a deep breath. They're not searching the wood. Only sentries, I expect. But it means that Miraz is an outpost down there. Bottles and battledores. It was a near thing, though, wasn't it, eh? I ought to have had my head smacked for bringing us this way, said Peter. On the contrary, your majesty, said the dwarf. For one thing, it wasn't you. It was your royal brother, King Edmund, who first suggested going by Glasswater. I'm afraid the DLF's right, said Edmund, who'd quite honestly forgotten things began going wrong. And for another, continued Trumpkin, If we'd gone my way, we'd have walked straight into that new outpost most likely, or at least just have had the same trouble avoiding it. I think this glasswater route has turned out for the best. A blessing in disguise, said Susan. Some disguise, said Edmund. I suppose we'll have to go right up the gorge again now, said Lucy. Lou, you're a hero, said Peter. That's the nearest you got today to saying, I told you so. Let's get on. As soon as we're well up into that forest, said Trunken, whatever anyone says, I'm going to light a fire and cook supper. But we must get well away from here. There's no need to describe how they toiled back up the gorge. It was pretty hard work, but oddly enough, everyone felt more cheerful. They were getting their second wind, and the word supper had had a wonderful effect. They reached the fir wood, which had caused them so much trouble while it was still daylight, and bivouacked in a hollow just above it. It was tedious gathering firewood, but it was grand when the fire blazed up and they began producing the damp and smeary parcels of bear meat, which would have been so very unattractive to anyone who had spent the day indoors. The dwarf had splendid ideas about cookery. Each apple, they still had a few of these, was wrapped up in bear's meat, as if it was to be an apple dumpling with meat instead of pastry, only much thicker. And it was spiked on a sharp stick and then roasted. I'm very sorry if you're vegetarian. And the juice of the apple worked all through the meat, like apple sauce with roast pork. Bear that had lived too much on other animals is not very nice, but bear that has plenty of honey and fruit is excellent. And this turned out to be that sort of bear. It was a truly glorious meal, and of course, no washing up. Only lying back and watching the smoke from Trunken's pipe and stretching one's tired legs and chatting. Everyone felt quite hopeful now about finding King Caspian tomorrow and defeating Moraz in a few days. It may not have been sensible of them to feel like this, but they did. They dropped off to sleep one by one, but all pretty quickly. Lucy woke out of the deepest sleep you can imagine, with a feeling that the voice she liked best in the world had been calling her name. She thought at first it was her father's voice, but that didn't seem quite right. Then she thought it was Peter's voice, but that didn't seem to fit either. She didn't want to get up, not because she was still tired. On the contrary, she was wonderfully rested, and all the aches had gone from her bones, but because she felt so extremely happy and comfortable. She was looking straight up at the Narnian moon, which is larger than ours, and at the starry sky, for the place where they had bivouacked was comparatively open. Lucy, came the call again, neither her father's voice nor Peter's. She sat up, trembling with excitement, but not with fear. The moon was so bright that the whole forest landscape around her was almost as clear as day, though it looked wilder. Behind her was the fir wood, away to her right the jagged cliffs, on the far side of the gorge, straight ahead open grass to where a glade of trees began about a bow-shot away. Lucy looked very hard at the trees of that glade. Why do I believe they're moving? She said to herself. They're walking about. She got up, her heart beating wildly, and walked towards them. There was certainly a noise in the glade, a noise such as trees make in high wind, though there was no wind tonight. Yet it was not exactly an ordinary tree noise either. Lucy felt there was a tune in it, but she couldn't catch the tune any more than she'd be able to catch the words when the trees had so nearly talked to her the night before. But there was, at least, a lilt. She felt her own feet wanting to dance as she got nearer. And now there was no doubt that the trees were really moving in and out, through one another, as if in a complicated country dance. And I suppose, thought Lucy, when trees dance, it must be a very, very country dance indeed. She was almost among them now. The first tree she looked at seemed at first glance to not be a tree at all, but a huge man with a shaggy beard and great bushes of hair. She was not frightened. She'd seen such things before. But when she looked again, he was only a tree, though he was still moving. You couldn't see whether he had feet or roots, of course, because when trees move, they don't walk on the surface of the earth. They wade in it, as we do in water. The same thing happened with every tree she looked at. At one moment they seemed to be the friendly, lovely giant and giantess forms which the tree people put on when some good magic had called them into full life. Next moment they all looked like trees again. But when they looked like trees, it was like strangely human trees, and when they looked like people, it was like strangely branchy and leafy people. And all the time that queer, lilting, rustling, cool, merry noise. They're almost awake. Not quite, said Lucy. She knew she herself was wide awake, wider than anyone usually is. That's being wide awake. That was freaky. Stop it! Blah! She went fearlessly in among them, dancing herself, as she leapt this way and that, to avoid being run into by these huge partners. But she was only half interested in them. She wanted to get beyond them, to something else. It was from beyond them that the dear voice had called. She soon got through them, half wondering whether she'd been using her arms to push branches aside, or to take hands in a great chain with big dancers who stooped to reach her, for they were really a ring of trees round a central open place. She stepped out from among their shifting confusion of lovely lights and shadows. A circle of grass, smooth as a lawn, met her eyes, with dark trees dancing all around it. And then, oh joy! For he was there, the huge lion, shining white in the moonlight, with his huge black shadow underneath him. But for the movement of his tail, he might have been a stone lion. But Lucy never thought of that. Lions don't go meow. She never stopped to think whether he was a friendly lion or not. She rushed to him. She felt her heart would burst if she lost a moment. And the next thing she knew, that she was kissing him and putting her arms as far around his neck as she could, and burying her face into the beautiful, rich silkiness of his mane. Aslan, Aslan, dear Aslan, sobbed Lucy. At last. The great beast rolled over onto his side, so that Lucy fell, half sitting and half lying between his front paws. He bent forwards and just touched her nose with his tongue. His warm breath came all round her. She gazed up into his large, wise face. Welcome, child, he said. Aslan, said Lucy, you're bigger. That is because you are older, little one, answered he. Not because you are. I am not. But every year you grow, you will find me bigger. For a time she was so happy she didn't want to speak, but Aslan spoke. Lucy, he said, we must not lie here for long. You have work in hand, and much time has been lost today. Yes, wasn't it a shame, said Lucy. I saw you all right. They wouldn't believe me. They're all so... From somewhere deep inside Aslan's body there came the faintest suggestion of a growl. I'm sorry, said Lucy, who understood some of his moods. I didn't mean to start slanging the others. But it wasn't my fault anyway, was it? The lion looked straight into her eyes. Oh, Aslan, said Lucy, you don't mean it was. How could I? I couldn't have left the others and come up to you alone. How could I? Don't look at me like that. Oh, well, I suppose I could. Yes, and it wouldn't have been alone, I know. Not if I was with you. But what would have been the good? Aslan said nothing. You mean, said Lucy rather faintly, that it would have turned out all right, somehow? But how? Please, Aslan, am I not to know? To know what would have happened, child, said Aslan. No, nobody is ever told that. Oh dear, said Lucy. But if anyone can find out what will happen, said Aslan. If you go... Sorry, he didn't say if, he said, but anyone can. If you go back to the others now, and wake them up, and tell them that you have seen me again, and that you must all get up at once and follow me, what will happen? There's only one way of finding out. Oh, do you mean that's what you want me to do? Gasped Lucy. Yes, little one, said Aslan. Will the others see you too? Asked Lucy. Certainly not at first, said Aslan. Later on. It depends. But they won't believe me, said Lucy. It doesn't matter, said Aslan. Oh dear, said Lucy. And I was so pleased at finding you again, and I thought you'd let me stay. And I thought you'd come roaring in and frighten all the enemies away like last time, and now everything's going to be horrid. It is hard for you, little one, said Aslan. But things never happen the same way twice. It has been hard for us all in Narnia before now. Lucy buried her head into his mane to hide from his face. But there must have been magic in his mane. She could feel lion strength going into her. Quite suddenly, she sat up. I'm sorry, Aslan, she said. I'm ready now. Now you are a lioness, said Aslan, and now all Narnia will be renewed. But come, we have no time to lose. He got up and walked with stately, noiseless paces back to the belt of dancing trees through which he had just come, and Lucy went with him, laying a rather tremulous hand on his mane. The trees parted to let them go through, and for 1 second assuming their human forms completely. Lucy had a glimpse of tall and lovely wood gods and wood goddesses all bowing to the lion. The next moment they were all trees again, but still bowing, with such graceful sweeps of branch and trunk that their bowing was in itself a kind of dance. Now, child, said Aslan, when they had left the trees behind them, I will wait here. Go and wake the others and tell them to follow me. If they will not, then you at least must follow me alone. Oh, it's so good, man! Oh! Sorry. It's... man. You know C.S. Lewis wrote Aslan to picture Jesus, right? Go and tell them to follow him, and if they won't, follow me anyway. Oh, it's good stuff. Back to the story. It's a terrible thing to have to wake 4 people, all older than yourself and all very tired, for the purpose of telling them something they probably won't believe, and making them do something they certainly won't like. I mustn't think about it. I must just do it, thought Lucy. She went first to Peter and shook him. Peter, she whispered in his ear, wake up, quick. Aslan is here. He says we've got to follow him at once. Certainly, Lou, whatever you like, said Peter unexpectedly. This was encouraging, but as Peter instantly rolled round and went to sleep again, it wasn't much use. Then she tried Susan. Susan really did wake up, but only to say in her most annoying grown-up voice, You've been dreaming, Lucy. Go to sleep again. She tackled Edmund next. It was very difficult to wake him, but when at last she'd done it, he was really awake, and he sat up. Hey, she said in a grumpy voice. What are you talking about? She said it all over again. This was one of the worst parts of her job, for each time she said it, it sounded less convincing. Aslan, said Edmund, jumping up. Hooray! Where? Lucy turned back to where she could see the lion waiting, but his patient eyes fixed upon her. There, she said, pointing. Where? Said Edmund again. There, don't you see? Just this side of the trees. Edmund stared hard for a while, and then said, No, there's nothing there. You know, you've got dazzled and muddled with the moonlight. One does, you know. I thought I saw something for a moment myself. It's only an optical... what-you-call-it. I can see him all the time, said Lucy. He's looking straight at us. Then why can't I see him? He said you mightn't be able to. Why? I don't know, that's what he said. Oh, bother it all, said Edmund. I do wish you wouldn't keep on seeing things. But I suppose we'll have to wait the others. Chapter 11. The Lion Roars. Oh, it's only 6. Do. Right, I'm going to carry on for a few more paragraphs. Then, when the whole party was finally awake, Lucy had to tell her story for the 4th time. The blank silence which followed it was as discouraging as anything can be. I can't see anything, said Peter, after he'd stared his eyes sore. Can you, Susan? No, of course I can't, snapped Susan. Because there isn't anything to see. She's been dreaming. Do lie down and go back to sleep, Lucy. And I do hope, said Lucy in a tremulous voice, that you will all come with me. Because I'll have to go with him whether anyone else does or not. Don't talk nonsense, Lucy, said Susan. Of course you can't go off on your own. Don't let her, Peter. She's being downright naughty. I'll go with her, if she must go, said Edmund. She's been right before. I know she has, said Peter, and she may well have been right this morning. We certainly had no luck going down the gorge still at this hour of the night. And why should Aslan be invisible to us? He never used to be. It's not like him. What does the DLF say? Oh, I say nothing at all, answered the dwarf. If you all go, of course, I will go with you. And if your party splits up, I'll go with the High King. That's my duty to him and Caspian. But if you ask my private opinion, I'm a plain dwarf who doesn't think there's much chance of finding a road by night when you couldn't find one by day. And I have no use for magic lions, which are talking lions and don't talk. And friendly lions, they don't do us any good. And whopping big lions so nobody else can see them. It's all bilge and beanstalks, as far as I can see. He's beating his paw on the ground for us to hurry, said Lucy. We must go now. At least I must. You've no right to try and force the rest of us like that. It's 4-1 and you're the youngest, said Susan. Oh, come on, growled Edmund. We've got to go. There'll be no peace till we do. He fully intended to back Lucy up, but he was annoyed at losing his night's sleep and was making up for it by doing everything as sulkily as possible. On the march, then, said Peter, warily fitting his arm into his shield strap and putting his helmet on. At any other time he would have said something nice to Lucy, who was his favourite sister, for he knew how wretched she must be feeling, and he knew that whatever happened, it was not her fault. But he couldn't help being a little annoyed with her all the same. Susan was the worst. Supposing I started behaving like Lucy, she said. I might threaten to stay here whether the rest of you went or not. I jolly well think I shall. Obey the High King, your Majesty, said Trumpkin, and let's be off. If I'm not allowed to sleep, I'd as soon march as stand here talking. And so, at last, they got on the move. Lucy went first, biting her lip. Hush now, Michael. Biting her lip and trying not to say all the things she thought of saying to Susan, but she forgot them when she fixed her eyes on Aslan. He turned and walked at a slow pace about 30 yards ahead of them. The others had only Lucy's directions to guide them, for Aslan was not only invisible to them, but silent as well. His big, cat-like paws made no noise on the grass. He led them to the right of the dancing trees. Whether they were still dancing, nobody knew, for Lucy had her eyes on the lion, and the rest had their eyes on Lucy. And he led them nearer to the edge of the gorge. Cobbles and kettle drums, thought Trumpkin. I hope this madness isn't going to end in a moonlight climb and broken necks. For a long way Aslan went along the top of the precipices. Then they came to a place where some little trees grew right on the edge. He turned and disappeared among them. Lucy held her breath, for it looked as if he plunged over the cliff. But she was too busy keeping him in sight to stop and think about this. She quickened her pace and was soon among the trees herself. Looking down, she could see a steep and narrow path going slantwise down into the gorge between rocks, and Aslan descending it. He turned and looked at her with his happy eyes. Lucy clapped her hands and began to scramble down after him. From behind her, she heard the voices of the others shouting, Hi, Lucy, look out for goodness sake! You're right on the edge of the gorge, come back! And then a moment later, Edmund's voice saying, No, she's right. There is a way down. Halfway down the path, Edmund caught up with her. Look, he said in great excitement. Oh, sorry. Look! Look, what's that shadow crawling down in front of us? It's his shadow, said Lucy. I do believe you're right, Lou, said Edmund. Oh, I can't think how I didn't see it before, but where is he? With his shadow, of course. Can't you see him? Well, I almost thought I did for a moment. It's such a rum light. Get on, King Edmund, get on, came Trumpkin's voice from behind them and above. And then further behind and still nearly near the top, Peter's voice saying, Oh, buck up, Susan! Give me your hand. Why, a baby could get down here. And do stop grousing. Okay, I know where I'm going to stop now. It's all good. In a few minutes they were at the bottom, and the roaring of the water filled their ears. Treading delicately like a cat, Aslan stepped from stone to stone across the stream. In the middle he stopped, bent down to drink, and as he raised his shaggy head, dripping from the water, he turned to face them again. This time Edmund saw him. Oh, Aslan! He cried, darting forward. But the lion whisked around again and began padding up the slope on the far side of the rush. Peter! Peter! Cried Edmund. Did you see? I saw something, said Peter, but it's so tricky in this moonlight. On we go, though, and 3 cheers for Lucy. I don't feel so half tired. I don't feel half so tired now, either. English. Why Peter? Never mind. Aslan, without hesitation, led them to their left, further up the gorge. The whole journey was odd and dreamlike. The roaring stream, the wet grey grass, the glimmering cliffs which they were approaching, and always the glorious, silently pacing beast ahead. Everyone except Susan and the dwarf could see him now. Presently they came to another steep path, up the face of the furthest precipice. These were far higher than the ones they'd just descended, and the journey up them was a long and tedious zigzag. Fortunately, the moon shone right above the gorge, so that neither side was in shadow. Lucy was nearly blown when the tail and hind legs of Aslan disappeared over the top. But with one last effort she scrambled after him, and came out, rather shaky-legged and breathless, on the hill they'd been trying to reach ever since they left Glasswater. The long, gentle slope, heather and grass, and a few very big rocks that shone white in the moonlight, stretched up to where it vanished in a glimmer of trees about half a mile away. She knew it. It was the hill of the stone table. Page 263! Woo! Ooh, I made the dog bark next door. Maybe I should stop slamming my book. Anyway, it's 6 o'clock now. Got to make food. So I wish you all well. God bless you all. Yeah, and I'll see you tomorrow at 5:30 for the next installment. Ciao.